could only be because I'm assuming is that there were agents. Of course, some came under pressure against their will, but there were agents willing to and agreeable to a weaponization of our justice system, the FBI. Do you believe that at this point it's even possible, not saying that Kash Patel or Pam Bondi or anybody else in these departments have claimed to have completely weeded out bad apples that were there as subversives, undermining our constitutional liberties and the rule of law? Is it possible, though, in a shorter period of time as they have all been in their positions, that they have been able to yet weed out the majority of the bad apples? Or are we to continue to assume that that is still an ongoing battle in these various agencies?
It's impossible. They couldn't. There's no way they could have done it in the 9 months that they've been in office. It's absolutely, utterly impossible for them to do that, because here's why. First of all, the FBI was weaponized against me for 2.5 years. They investigated me for 2.5 years, even though I never even went into the U.S. Capitol. Ultimately, I think that they investigated me because they thought I was the mastermind for J6. They thought I was the mastermind. I know it's humorous.
They thought you were the mastermind?
So, yeah, then I believe they did, because I had done that on the intelligence side for our government, with regard to other countries, right? Not that I had done that specific thing, but I had planned those kinds of events. How do you train for it is you come up with scenarios for how those things would happen. And so then when they do happen, you know how to respond, right? So I think that because they knew at the time of January 6th, I was the senior intelligence collection strategist for domestic terrorism in the United States. I was at the DNI writing the strategy for the National Security Council, and basically writing the collection posture statement. How are we arrayed? How are we collecting on domestic terrorism? And also for foreign as well, for foreign domestic terrorism, or REMV, racially and ethnically motivated violent extremists. And so I was at the tip of the spear with regard to advising the national security community, in particular the National Security Council, on these things. And I say advising, my job was to collect from all the agencies their capabilities and what their intelligence gaps were, and put that into a document and get that to the National Security Council so they could make good choices about domestic terrorism and REMV. And I warned the FBI in October of 2020 that we were headed into a potential Black Swan event. I believe that there was a lot of fragility in the country because of the 2020 election, the Russia hoax, the Hunter Biden laptop that had been covered up, the Carter Page investigation, abuses of constitutional liberty, basically complete and blatant violations of the Constitution by the federal government. Many people thought the election was stolen. It was definitely corruptly influenced by the FBI for sure, and the CIA. We know that now because we know what Pam Bondi is, or what Tulsi Gabbard has recently released. But my point in saying all that is I was literally doing that. I was literally looking at what the FBI had on domestic terrorism and what their principles and their policies were. And when I warned against the potential Black Swan, my FBI Joint Duty Assignment boss labeled me a domestic extremist because I was this Trump supporter. And she tried to get me fired. She tried to get me run out of the office. It didn't work. Ultimately, I was the national spokesman for Vets for Trump at the time. And because of that, I think they assumed that I was connected to Michael Flynn, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers. I must have been associated to them because I was the national spokesman for Vets for Trump. So after January 6th, like I said, I did not go in the building. In fact, I stopped potential violence on January 5th personally, and then I was trying to warn people on January 6th not to fall for the trap, because I do believe that there were instigators and agitators out there. But my point is that on January 6th, the FBI for years had wanted a federal domestic terrorism statute for years. they had been advocating for a federal domestic terrorism statute so that they could get around the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And my job at the DNI, I was pushing back against that desire and saying that it's unconstitutional. We know about the church committee. You can't do this. And they didn't like that answer, that they couldn't do it because they wanted to do it anyway. So this January 6th, they just used January 6th as an excuse to go after who they viewed were enemies of the government. I mean, that's how they viewed them. They viewed these people, patriots that supported Trump, as enemies of the government. But more importantly, what they wanted to do was they wanted to exercise their force so that they could circumvent the U.S. Constitution and go after people for their exercise of their free speech, which ultimately they did for me because ultimately the only thing I did was speak to foreign press that day, and that it was Russian news, and they got in my face and they said, "Why are people doing this?" And I said, "Because we don't want to have a shithole country like Russia." And I said, because this building doesn't belong to them. It was I laugh about it because they cut that part off. And the second part of what I said was, this building doesn't belong to them. It belongs to us. They work for us. And in my mind, I was talking to a Russian audience, but the Russians clipped it and then they published it and they said, Tom Speciale, national security stuff, army reformist, whatever. And my own government was weaponized against me as a result of my free speech. And they investigated me for 2.5 years. They subpoenaed my phone records, my Verizon secretly for 2 years. They can get your records without you knowing it. They subpoenaed my phone records, my Twitter, my Facebook. I believe they surreptitiously entered my home, basically B&E'd my home. They may have bugged my house. I don't know. I never went and looked, even though I could have looked. I didn't. I knew what to look for, but I never went and looked because I didn't care if they bugged my house. And I know I had physical surveillance on me. I have personally seen my FBI file. I haven't seen the contents, but I've seen the main page, and the main page has 89 documents in it. And so they were weaponized against me. And I have a top secret SCI security clearance. I have a polygraph. I have been in the military since 1987. They could have knocked on my door and asked me to search my house. I would have let them do it. I wouldn't have cared. There was nothing to find. Like, I really don't care. You can come and search my house. But that's why I believe they thought I was like the master machine, because it was the only reason to justify 2.5 years of an investigation before they closed it. I was the DOJ or the DOJ. I believe they gave them a FISA on me. The Department of Defense denied me promotions, all for just an investigation. No one ever even said I committed a crime. They did it. They denied me a promotion in the Army Reserves just for being at the cap. Like, literally, that was the reason that they gave. And they tried to kick me out of the reserves, but I recently beat them. And you can find out. I just did a press conference on this last Friday. You can find it. All the details are there, and it's all on my website as well. But to your point, and I say all that because I am intimately familiar with the weaponization of the federal government, from the Department of War, the War Department now, to the FBI and the DOJ, as well as Army Counterintelligence and Army Criminal Investigative Division. They were all weaponized against me, all of them. And so, yeah, the whole federal government was weaponized. And how do we fix it? Well, there's really only one way to fix it, and that is you have to take from the FBI their ability to do intelligence operations. That's where this went sideways on the American people. Because when law enforcement people are given intelligence authorities, then they don't actually have to have a crime. They can say there's a suspicion of a crime having occurred, and then they can surreptitiously enter your home. They can get your phone records. They can do all this stuff under essentially the counterintelligence division, the counterintelligence bureau of the FBI. That's an intelligence division. Here's where the problem is. And this is in my report also that I published, and you can find it on my website, and you can find it on Amazon inside the FBI's domestic terrorism. But the bottom line is the FBI are not professional intelligence officers. They are cops that can travel from state to state. That's all they are. really high paid, really pretty cops. That's all they are. And they're no different than any detective in any state detective agency. They're no different. They're not specially skilled. They're not all, law enforcement ninjas. Okay. They are no different than any good
detective in any jurisdiction across the United States.
Right. In fact, they basically run the school for all the detectives, so they're basically the same. But they pretend to be intelligence professional.
And where is the gap in, because you bring up an interesting point to me. What you're saying is the FBI is a law enforcement agency, just nationalized, as opposed to a local police department that would have detectives investigating crimes. So they're just detectives moved to Washington, D.C., or having that jurisdiction of the nation. And
Right.
You're saying that whatever makes you a good detective in solving crime is not the same skill set as intelligence gathering.
Correct.
And intelligence gathering
Totally different.
is supposed to be whose domain then? The CIA, but not domestically. Whose domain would be intelligence gathering within the United States for
Great question. Great question. Currently, it's the National Security Bureau of the FBI and the National Security Division of the DOJ. And so we've got cops that are pretending to be intelligence officers that are trying to do intelligence work, but they're not actually, very, very, very small number of them actually go to an intelligence credentialing school. A very, very, very small number that can actually work under, that can actually do like real intelligence work, real true intelligence work, tradecraft, things like that. They're not trained to do that. They're trained to collect fingerprints and apply, critical thinking to a crime scene. But they're not trained in the real counterintelligence work. Even though they call themselves counterintelligence agents, they are not trained intelligence. Most of them are not trained.
What's the danger? Let's take it this way. So, you've got the police officer detective head on, and you go to DC. You were with Seattle or New York.
Yep.
Police departments. You go to DC, and you put on your regular. You keep that cop hat on and detective hat on, but then somebody says, "Hey, why don't you come over here into our intelligence division of the FBI?" And you say, "Okay, great. It's just police work, right?" It's not. You're telling me. And you put on this new hat. He sits down at his desk or whatever he's going to do, the computer. What doesn't he know? And I'm not talking about like entrapping foreign aid. Like the CIA was originally designed to be an intelligence gathering, not to do color revolutions. That was not the intention of the CIA. So what does an intelligence agency or an agent within the intelligence community, what do they do and what do they need to know and how do they discern something differently than a guy who was a detective in New York City's jurisdiction?
Yeah, here's the fundamental difference. The fundamental difference is that cops want arrests. They want to find you guilty of some kind of crime. They want to put you on handcuffs and they want to put you in jail. An intelligence operation, you may not want to arrest somebody. You may want to feed them misinformation that they feed back to their foreign government, and you may do that for 10 years. That's a completely different skill set. How to run that person, how to work that person is a completely different skill set than just putting handcuffs on them and prosecuting them for espionage.
Okay, wait, I have a question here. But when we have tens upon tens upon tens of millions of foreigners in the United States, probably about 40 to 50 million illegals, because that's the actual number. And then, or that's a good estimate. And then you've got, say, 50, 60 million, let's say 55 million who have visas of some sort, whether they're all here in the United States or a majority of them are.
Yeah.
That's now you're around 100 million. And then you also include those we've naturalized who never really were, or have green cards that never really were part of a loyal American populace. You put that kind of a number in front of us, you've got to have intelligence to deal with the obvious espionage inside our nation and terror threat and other subversive activities on behalf of foreign nations, but domestically. So who's supposed to deal with that? Because CIA is supposed to be there, right? They're supposed to be in some other country doing what they do.
That's correct. Currently, it's the FBI. Currently, it's the National Security Bureau of the FBI. They're supposed to be looking at the 40, everybody you just talked about, that's their job, to root those spies out. But the problem is real spies are trained to be undetectable. And the law enforcement people of the FBI are not trained in detecting the undetectable. They're not intelligent, not trained in what to even look for. Not technically, not like I literally learned how to do interrogations for months. The FBI gets 2 weeks of interrogation training. They get 2 weeks of interrogation training. I had months of interrogation training and managing sources. Okay, running clandestine relationships, not having, communicating with a source without being detected. I'm trained in doing that. These guys are not trained in doing that. They're not trained in what to look for. So what I have suggested, and it's a great, this is my second time I've been able to talk about this, because the FBI was weaponized against me, and I know that they had a case against me. I also went in as a senior advisor for Tulsi Gabbard in counterintelligence and security, and I was working 70 hours a week for 3 months. And all I did was understand the counterintelligence enterprise of the United States government. So I know everything that the CIA is doing. I know with regard to counterintelligence. I know everything FBI is doing. And so I got the details. I know how they function. I know their leadership structure. I know their promotion structure. I know their training. Okay, their training structure. There isn't much about counterintelligence that I don't know, because I've known it's been broken for years. This is not a new problem. This goes back, I just came across a book from like the 1970s where one of the directors of the national security agencies was saying that our problem with the intelligence community is counterintelligence. And it's the exact same problems, because the FBI is running counterintelligence and they're cops. They're not trained intelligence officers. So I have written three executive orders, drafts, and they are one desk away from the president right now. I know for a fact they are one desk away from the president, and multiple people have them, but they haven't, as far as I know, they haven't gone to the president yet. I hope they do soon. The first one is, as I want we the people in every federal building over the president, the vice president photos, all those, I wanted to say we the people. And I think that's an easy executive order. I think Trump will sign it in one day. That will remind every federal worker that we swear oaths to the Constitution, not to presidents, not to parties or ideologies. We swear oaths to the people of the country. That is who our oath is to. It's to the people. So that means no matter who you are not protected from me, because I am loyal to the country over every single person. The second executive order is I want my entire FBI investigation declassified, because I know I'm squeaky clean. I mean, if they saw me picking my butt and they got it on video, I want it made public. Okay, I want everything made public. That's the second executive.
I don't want to see that, but go ahead.
You don't want to have to. I'll give. There'll be a warning. There'll be a warning on the video before you see it. Okay, there'll be a warning on that. Beware before pushing this. Tom's picking his butt. But the third one is an executive order. It's the most sophisticated executive order of the three that I wrote, of course. And it is a complete remake of the counterintelligence enterprise in the United States to break away the counterintelligence infrastructure from the FBI and create a new agency, a national counterintelligence agency. And it would be extremely limited in its focus. It would only be able to investigate foreign intelligence operations in the United States, period.
That's not Americans.
No, if an American is collaborating with a foreigner,
Of course, you're right.
or the foreigner is in the United States trying to recruit Americans, then they would be involved in that because it's a foreign intelligence operation. Okay, they would be extremely focused on espionage, treason, sedition, the national security crimes. National security crime. They would have to have some level of law enforcement authority because sometimes people commit other crimes in the carrying out of their national security crime, right? But at the same time, they would not be interested in arresting every single person. They would be, because there's other, if we arrest
intelligence, they're countering the intelligence assets in the United States. So
correct.
It makes a lot of sense because I think the bleed over, I mean, I'm no expert, but it seems to me that when you are, the FBI's role is law enforcement, and that is a very different role than intelligence gathering and counterintelligence. The CIA does that, but they can't operate supposedly on American soil. And so a separate division that is not connected in any significant way with the CIA or the FBI. Obviously, they know each other, the bosses. But that then have
to go. It would have to go like, let's say you decide you're not going to go forward with a counterintelligence operation, and you want a person arrested. At that point, you would have a nexus into the DOJ.
Sure.
And the DOJ would oversee that
Why is this all important? Are you telling me to clarify this? Because we've gone, you take the story, you start off with, what your experience was, and then you move to this area of we need to separate intelligence out of the FBI. And that is because you're telling me, I believe that the FBI, which is a law enforcement agency, unless they're going to change their remit, they're a law enforcement agency, but they're working also as an intelligence gathering and a counterintelligence agency. And when they do that, this blurs the line, and suddenly, actually, we've got, in effect, the CIA working domestically, and it's within law enforcement. And maybe that
you have a Stasi, you have a Gestapo. That's what they become. That's what they became. That's what they did with Donald Trump. That's what they did with Carter Page. That's what they did with Michael Flynn. That's what they did with me. That's what they did all over the country against the, the entire church committee was spying on American citizens for ideological reasons. The KKK, the Ku Klux. It was fine in the church committee. People didn't realize this, but 50% of the KKK leaders were all run by the FBI. They were all confidential human sources for the FBI. When the KKK finally came down, they had won their way into all these organizations and had taken leadership of the organizations. We know that.
But are they perpetuating it then? Were they perpetuating the KKK?
Yeah, I believe that what happens is, and I'll use the Whitmer case as an example. That was done as a domestic terrorism case, okay? And what they did is let's say there's 14 people, and let's say 13 of them come forward to the FBI and they say, my friend Bubba is talking crazy, and I want the FBI to know that he's talking crazy about going in after and assassinating this governor. And so all of there's 13 of them, but they don't know they're all reporting to the FBI, not a one of them. They're all independently reporting to the FBI. No deconfliction, okay? And then the one guy, Bubba, he's in a room with 14 people who seem like they're agreeing with him because the FBI has told them, go back, stay the guy's friend, and keep us informed. Try not to encourage him or don't encourage him. Well, just going to his meeting,
it's encouraging him.
It seems to the crazy guy that he's got 14 friends,
right?
13 friends, but he really doesn't. And if you look at the Whitmer experiments, that's exactly what happens in the Whitmer, the the psychological experiments years ago where they put people and they have fake doctors.
MK Ultra.
Well, no. They were psychological tests that were done, and you'd have like 3 people, and 2 of them would be in on the test, and they would say which line is the longest, and clearly say the third line is the longest, and they'd say, the second line, the second line. Those are total lies. And then the third guy, about 20% of the time, would go the second line, even though he knew that that was not true. He would go along with the other people. That's what's happening. That's what's happening when, you got Bubba, he's 3 beers in, everybody's working for the FBI, he doesn't know it, and he thinks he's got 13 friends that are going to help. So he thinks it's a good idea. But all it would have taken is one person to say to him, that's not going to happen, and if you talk about it anymore, I'm going to have to report you to the FBI. And we're going to go get you some mental health and some alcohol rehab. Because, Bubba, you need to stop drinking so much. And, all it would have taken is one person in that room to say, no, we're not doing it. And if you keep it up, I'm going to have to report you to the FBI. I love you, man. I love you, Bubba. But you're
right. But
crazy.
So what you're saying is the FBI is these projects or operations are very dangerous because they're in hands that maybe are not fit for purpose. They're not really intended to be doing this kind of work. And obviously there's not always, I think, a proper motivation, because I would assume that many of the people that were assigned to going after January 6th, assigned to going after the president and all of his associates and friends, that many of these people had ill intentions. They had to have known it was unconstitutional what they were doing. But they're the kind of people that are cheering on the Charlie Kirk assassination. And
the other thing too is then you look at Garrett O'Boyle, and you look at Steve Friend, and you look at these other people who were in the organizations, or myself, by the way, who were in these organizations saying you can't do this. They just fired them, put them on suspension. You're not a team player. So anybody who spoke up lost their job. And that should never, how is that possible? And so that is why the executive order I've written is so important, because I think we need to immediately separate all counterintelligence functions. And that money, by the way, there's national intelligence program money, and then there's other program money. So the FBI gets national intelligence program money specifically for their intelligence functions. And so what I would say is, we want every person that is billeted, being paid, and all of the resources and all the infrastructure is immediately transferred to this new agency. And the executive order is basically a temporary holding under the DNI until we get the legislation done. So it would happen immediately. The president could do it immediately.
What kind of effects would this have? If the president signed the executive order or an amended version that's basically the same in effect, what would you achieve? What would be the immediate effect by having that separation and a separate intelligence gathering domestic agency?
This is also the same agency that's basically been the forefront of what Trump calls the deep state, the leadership of the bureaucracy that's opposing him. It would essentially defang the deep state forever. And I don't usually use the deep state. I try and stay on the bureaucracy. But more and more, I'm beginning to see a deep state because of the emails between Clapper and Comey and Brennan that were clearly a coup. Okay, they were clearly seditious against President Trump when he went into office. And so I'm starting to think there is a deep state. But it would defang the deep state because they do all these operations domestically against their political opponents through the FBI, National Security Division, and the DOJ lawfare. So it would utterly, I'm telling you, it would change the face of the intelligence community.
Let me see. Well, sometimes when I'm getting something, I'll just be very rude. Son, stop. Let me ask you.
Go ahead.
Would this be a massive shift, or, not a paradigm shift, but have major effect within, I guess, the law enforcement intelligence community, and affecting lawfare and politically targeted actions and operations, because the FBI is a domestic law enforcement agency that is working under the Department of Justice, where the Department of Justice is obviously taking cases that the FBI and the Department of Justice, they go back and forth. They're the same animal with different, exact assignments, if you will.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Or responsibilities. And because the intelligence gathering that should be for terrorists, foreign and domestic, whoever's in the United States, espionage and all that, they're actually connected to the Department of Justice. And instead of treating it like this is about espionage and foreign actors and nations and, against the United States, it's then run up or into the Department of Justice, who then has the power to take this to court and to prosecute individuals. And so there's this muddling of things. If I'm a serial killer, the FBI is going to be looking for me. They find me. The Department of Justice takes it on. If I am a company that is discriminating against all, I don't know, I refuse to hire women, right? And so I'm discriminating against in an equal employment opportunity framework. The Department of Justice will take that on and their Civil Rights Division. But intelligence is of necessity, or by definition, about acts against the United States of America. And it's not as much about just law enforcement and putting bad guys away and finding companies or and so because they're in the same department, this is getting mixed. And so they're treating, for instance, if I was actually there on January 6th, I didn't go anywhere near the Capitol. I said to my husband, let's go back to the hotel room. I live in Virginia, but we didn't want to have to fly. Let's go back. I can't stand this. It was too cold, too crowded, blah, blah, blah. We went back to watch it on TV, and I looked at what was going on TV, and I couldn't believe what was happening. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I had rented or we did not pay for the hotel room just because we took somebody else's room. So we were not part of any record as being there. Otherwise, who knows? They may have investigated us. So instead, we've got the FBI investigating me, say, for seditious activities or domestic terrorism, and it shouldn't be part of the same division. They should be at total arm's length from each other, because they're not. I'm not a domestic terrorist. If I break a law, it's because I just broke a law as an American.
Correct.
Not as a foreign subversive.
That's right.
Or operating.
Right. And I want to admit, the real like sort of, to go back to the Comey, Brennan, Clapper thing, Comey knew that the dossier was bogus in April of 2016. He knew that it was a BS. 2016. He knew it was Oppo research. It was fabricated by the DNC in April of 2016. Okay. But when he went in to meet Trump in December, he portrayed it as being legit to the president. He basically went into the president and personal meeting with the new incoming president. And Comey says, hey, Mr. President, the Russians have this dossier. And Trump said, it is a lie. It is a lie. Now, Comey should have immediately said, Mr. President, we know. What he didn't. And he let the Mueller investigation go forward. He let all this kind of stuff go forward. Russia hoax.
Because that would be intelligence. That would be
That's correct. That was his intelligence.
Intelligence and counterintelligence, because it's about always connected to some foreign entity or process, right?
Correct. But he knew it was a domestic thing. He knew it was from Hillary Clinton. He didn't tell the president that. The president had to go find that out on his own. He's probably suspected it, but he had to find it out later. And that's what Kash Patel ended up finding out later. But my point is, why didn't he tell the president that he knew? And I'll tell you why. Because I think Comey thought he was going to intimidate Donald Trump with fake, fabricated intelligence information. I think he went in there thinking that he could intimidate the president. That's what he thought. Because that's the only reason I can come up with that you wouldn't admit to the president that you knew that it was BS. And so that's why I'm saying this should be somebody who, whatever we have as a counterintelligence entity, should be only doing foreign counterintelligence
within domestic,
in the domestic state
environment.
And they can be working with CIA's counterintelligence, because CIA's counterintelligence is abroad. Okay. And that's fine, because CIA does everything abroad for intel functions. So we need that to be together, but they don't have a law enforcement function in CIA. So that would be a huge.
I like it a lot. It makes a lot of sense. And it's almost like, you don't want the fox, guarding the hen house. You don't want someone. I think it comes down to, you don't want muddled lines.
That's right. That's correct.
That's right.
That's correct.
That's what it is. Well, listen, yesterday we heard about an operation under the Biden administration. It's just so mind-boggling, called Arctic Frost. Do you know anything about that?
I've heard it recently, but I haven't been following it. So,
okay, we won't even.
I haven't been following it.
Don't worry about it. Arctic Frost is a thing where they were targeting not only President Trump, all of his associates, but also Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA, because and Charlie had mentioned this, I don't know if it was to Kash Patel or somebody a couple of years ago, and that he thinks he's being targeted by the FBI or somebody. Well, anyway, I'd like to go ahead and close on the Charlie Kirk issue.
We're good.
It seems to me that a lot of people are probably asking the same question. Are we in a situation where this extreme violence and the celebration of this unholy celebration of vile murder is now become a thing in the United States, God forbid? I feel as if we're at a national crisis, and that it is not going to be something that, if we just discuss it a little bit on Fox and on podcasts, that it's going to go away. Or Congress will have some committee hearings and they'll look at social media and its effect on youth, or phones in the classroom. All of those things can and should be done. But I think it is a national emergency, because we have brainwashed or indoctrinated, or both, a generation or two of young people. And this is the fruit of the seeds that have been sown. And I'm not sure, do you think that that the FBI and, I guess, the Trump administration understand fully, or have maybe potentially next steps? What can we do? Instead of asking about them, I will just ask you, what should we be doing about this crisis?
Sure. I think that we have to do what Charlie would do. We have to continue the debate. We have to stand on our values. We have to be as polite as we possibly can. Because if we don't do that, we lose the argument. We lose the entire thing.
I don't mean from a personal standpoint. What I'm saying is this.
As a country,
this is a guy who literally in social media and chat rooms, wherever, we don't know the extent of it, was talking about taking out Charlie Kirk in one way or the other. These things, somebody in intelligence or, understanding this kind of the language being used would have been able to identify that as a threat. And we have some indication that it was being discussed even a month before. I don't know that, none of us know yet whether that.
You don't know the details.
No, we don't. We hear things, but we don't know how it'll finally end up sorting itself out. What can be done by law enforcement or domestic intelligence gathering, which is a scary thing, to prevent this kind of thing or crush it from happening?
First of all, we have to maintain I'm talking about what the government has to do. On my website, thomasspeciale.com, you're going to find a document on there. It's called the National Counterterrorism Domestic Terrorism Conference Report. It was a conference that they did on domestic terrorism in 2020. And when you find it, it's only about 4 or 5 pages. It's basically a overview of the findings of this domestic terrorism conference. And the FBI basically suggested that that we need to have a federal domestic terrorism statute so that we can get around that pesky thing called the First Amendment. That the First Amendment is supposed to be speech activities protected. This is what it says, verbatim. Speech activities protected under the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution should be viewed as a factor, not a constraint in their activities. Now think about it. Okay? Like literally, this is the FBI saying that free speech is not protected and we should be able to investigate you if you say something we don't like. So the problem is whether or not we're going to be investigating people based on their free speech or we're going to investigate them on their actions, right? So that's the rub. And I have a good friend of mine. I just did an interview with him yesterday, Mike Van Meter, former counterterrorism, domestic terrorism, FBI senior special agent. And he's helped me understand in detail how the FBI domestic terrorism. And the bottom line is there's 3 things. You have to have a crime of some kind. Before you can do a domestic terrorism investigation, you have to have a crime. Because they can't investigate you on the suspicion of a crime. They got to have a crime that occurred. Then you have to have a crime of violence, right? That was intended to have an ideological effect, the third thing, right? So you have to have all 3 of those things before they can do a domestic terrorism investigation into you. Anything outside of that is considered an intelligence. But from a criminal perspective, that's why they wanted federal domestic terrorism statute. That's a criminal statute. What we have to do is we have to be very, very cautious that free speech is utterly protected. Utterly. Because if we don't have that, we don't have a free country. So, as a government, what we should do is we probably need to, there's a couple things that I've thought about. One of which is, I believe that we need to have Sentinels. Sentinels are volunteers that are in our community that have a reporting function on their phone, that if they see something, they can say something directly to the local law enforcement. And that would be like a Sentinel function. So in other words, if I see somebody get taken into a car, I can go on my app and I can take a photo of the car and I can hit it and it goes right to law enforcement. And it also goes to my other Sentinels maybe, so my other Sentinels can be looking for a person who's missing or hit. So we need to have a community that says, see something, say something, right? We've got to have that. And it's got to be easy to communicate it because, people saw this kid and I'll bet you over the next couple of days, we're going to see that several people had feelings about this guy before he got up on the roof, that he said things to him or whatever. It's all going to come out that he had been saying that he was going to, kill somebody like Charlie Kirk, or he wanted to kill Charlie Kirk, or somebody should kill Charlie Kirk, or whatever, probably for weeks. And a lot of times, and I've done a lot of work in mental health to understand this, a lot of times the only people that find out that somebody has basically a mental crisis of some kind is their most intimate people. What did his parents know about this gun that he had bought? Did they know anything? They may not have known anything.
He didn't buy the gun. It was a gift from his grandfather.
Well, so they knew he had this gun. Did they know that he was talking about maybe killing somebody? We don't know, right? We don't know. And I'm not suggesting that they did. I'm just saying that we don't know right now the details of what was even possibly known about the situation. But we cannot overreact in a free society, because the vast
once you go beyond, once we take away free speech, there's just no getting it back. You won't have free speech to be fighting for free speech.
That's correct. We cannot do that. One of the interesting things it says in this report is that the FBI wanted a criminal domestic terrorism statute for deterrence purposes. So they weren't going to enforce it. They were just going to use it to intimidate the American people into silence. Now, that's another approach that the FBI has suggested taking, is to have a federal domestic terrorism criminal statute so that you can intimidate people into silence about their beliefs. That is also something that we have to be.
So let me ask a question. You mentioned the Sentinel, like an app, essentially, where you could take a picture or whatever and goes directly to the relevant entities, whether other Sentinels or local law enforcement, perhaps even the FBI, what have you. When this guy was in chats on Discord, and I don't know where else he was, I can't remember. And he was making these weird statements, and others were saying things too. This guy named Owen, I think, on X, but I'm not sure if it was X. And he said, well, there's going to be essentially something big happening to Charlie Kirk. If the FBI looks at that, are they infringing on the free speech rights of this? No, they're not.
No, they're not. As long as they are, they're only as an observer, that'd be fine. Especially if, but there are limitations on whether or not you can get into even some of these things. That's why the FBI wants to be able to unlock Apple phones, and they want to do all these things that are security related. But those are all infringements on free speech, right? The bottom line is, I have a very good friend of mine who's a retired Special Forces officer, and we were talking